If you like what you're hearing, put your money where your media is by subscribing to independent podcasts like this one. Go to lauraflanders.org/membership. And thanks. Hi, I'm Laura Flanders, and this is The Laura Flanders Show, the TV and radio program that seeks to raise radical spirits by interviewing forward-thinking people with real models of shifting power from the worlds of arts, entrepreneurship, politics, and activism. Decolonizing wealth, decolonizing expertise. This week I talk with Edgar Villanueva about being one of the very few Indigenous people working in grant-making, and ask what he thinks Native American traditions might have to teach philanthropy. Then we report from the United Nations, where Indigenous women gathered from around the world this spring to flip the script on so-called Indigenous issues. Money. Today's guest says it is basically Kleenex adorned with dead presidents. But we can't deny it has power. So can we use money in ways that are healthier? Or is it inevitable that it uses us? My next guest says that turning to Native America may just hold the key to our modern ailments. Edgar Villanueva, a rare Native American voice in the world of philanthropy, has a book coming out, Decolonizing Wealth, which delves into all this and more. What if money could be medicine instead of what divides us, he asks. Edgar, welcome to the show. Glad to have you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
So how the heck did you go from being on your way to being a minister to being a program officer at a foundation? How did it happen?
Well, you know, in many ways, it's not a stretch. I think I've always been inclined to service, wanting to help others. Ideally, or initially growing up, my church was a major place of focus in my community and in my family. And it was the only vehicle that I knew of at that time to help people because it was a place where I had received help. I later learned that there was a nonprofit sector and this, many other avenues and ways to support folks. But I think the essence of the church and the faith community is very connected to the mission of philanthropy in terms of loving others and helping others.
So you go in loving others, helping others. You feel pretty good for a moment while you're in there. But this book is a devastating takedown of philanthropy, which you call a living anachronism, a contradiction in terms, just a place where white people give away stolen money and feel better about it afterwards. I mean, these turned out to be not just your own feelings about philanthropy, but a whole lot of people that you interview.
Absolutely. The point of the book is to be a bit provocative and to cause a conversation about how we can be better. I have lived and worked within philanthropy for 14 years and have, personally seen beyond some of the altruistic facade, so to speak, into the shadows. And so philanthropy has a culture where we often have an extreme politeness because we're good folks doing good work. And a lot of that work is very good, and I should not, will not discredit that. However, there's a lot that could be changed. And I think of philanthropy as my family, but there's some dysfunction there that as I would with my own family, I want to call out that dysfunction and call us to a place of being better.
Now, a core part of your story is about being Native American in philanthropy and being young when you entered the field. Talk a bit about what you learned about what was common in your experience being a one of a kind in an institution like that. What was common with other people who were brought in kind of as, I don't want to say tokens, but they were kind of alone in their fields?
Absolutely. And I think tokens is an adequate description for many of us. The field often likes to hire people like me who come from the community with lived experience and, sometimes to check a box. And there are a lot of diversity initiatives. And I think the intentions are well-meaning, but often we don't have a culture within the field that supports our ability to be successful in this space. And so after coming into philanthropy and working for a number of years, I began to see that the way the culture was inside of the institution did not always mirror the stated mission, right, of the organization.
How so? Give us an example.
So I think when you look at the values of stated values that a lot of foundations have around equity, justice, really, moving the needle on certain social issues. But you look who are calling the shots and designing those initiatives and how exclusive that table is. And you also look at who is receiving those resources. You see a lot of inequality there.
I mean, one of the shocking things that you say is that many of the members of the board have appeals, have requests pending at the institutions that they are the board of, and they're very rarely rejected.
Absolutely. So, there are lots of, most people tend to like to fund people who look like them or people that they know, people that they have relationships with and trust. And if you don't have people who are not in your network who don't look like you or come from the same type of place, then those folks are less likely to have the same type of access to funding.
Okay, so people should read the book if they want to hear the chapter and verse of what went on there. It wasn't altogether pretty. But you do kind of dust yourself off, and the majority of the book is dedicated to what could be done differently.
Absolutely.
Give us some of the examples or some of the strategies. For one thing, you say there needs to be an apology. And you describe a scene with a lot of philanthropists in, I think it was North Carolina, where a young white guy gets up and does exactly that, kind of cops to his history. Can you describe that moment and what it meant to you?
Sure. So the particular moment you're describing, a young man at a funders conference got up to make a presentation, and he began sharing his presentation. His remarks included sharing that he had been the descendant of a great-grandfather who owned slaves. And he wanted to acknowledge that history and apologize for it. And so a simple apology, of course, cannot undo the years of traumatization that slavery, genocide, colonization has caused. But I think when we get to a place where we can apologize and acknowledge that, what role our families may have played in that process, it at least gets us to a place where we can begin to move on in some kind of way. And so I think for philanthropy, understanding that the resources that we have were often accumulated in ways that cause trauma, especially in communities of color. And so when we acknowledge that history, we learn about it, first of all, because so many don't know. We learn about the history and we acknowledge that, and then we begin to apply that lens to how we're distributing resources. It could really be transformational.
Why not just give the money back? Why not just give the land back? That's often a point that is made. Just give it back.
I like that point, actually. But I think when we think about decolonization as a political process, which literally means to give the land back, to reinstate rights, maybe some people leave and, settlers leave and go back to their countries of origin. It really gets stuck as a political process because in the 21st century America, there really is no reality, I believe, where we're not going to be together, right? Our businesses are intertwined, our families are intertwined at this point. And so I think the best path forward is for us to recognize the shared trauma that colonization has caused, not only for people of color, but for white people, and think about how we can come together in a collective healing process.
So how can we? Can we?
Yeah, absolutely. I really believe that we can. I'll be honest, the book tells my personal story of sort of coming to terms with that reality, especially post-election. I was feeling a lot of hurt, devastated like many around the results of the election. And I did not think of people who voted for Trump, for example, as my relatives or my brothers and sisters, right? And I spent some time in a community talking to an elder who said to me, Edgar, those folks are your relatives. That's our value. You have to love them. You have to see them as your brothers and sisters, even though they're making choices that may harm you.
Even though they're showing up in the streets with, blood and soil signs?
Absolutely. I think we have to acknowledge that hurting people hurt others. And I'm not saying that we have to, of course, condone their behavior or it's unjustified. But I think if we can see that all of us are suffering at some level and begin to create ways to be less polarized, to come together in some type of circle, we can begin to think of ways to move forward together.
So does that look like foundations going through that process and funding coming together projects?
I think so. There are some foundations who are doing, funding initiatives in that way, sort of radical solidarity, or finding ways to support coming together across the divides. But I also think foundations can fund sort of the healing or reversal of the traumatization that colonization has caused. And when I talk about colonization, we kind of think of like hundreds of years ago, right? And I am referring to that type of colonization that has resulted in generations of trauma on communities. But I also mean, history as early as yesterday, because colonization ultimately is about dividing, controlling, exploiting, separating. And so when we look at what's happening right now in our country, we see that there's still a lot of those tactics are in play to harm communities of color and those who are less resourced. And so I think philanthropy could be really intentional about moving its resources in ways that facilitate coming together.
So let's talk about This is the Laura Flanders Show. I'm Laura. My guest, Edgar Villanueva, is a recognized expert on social justice philanthropy. He's also the author of Decolonizing Money, a book he sat down to write because of his mixed feelings about the colonial dynamics of the social investment and philanthropic complex. The principles of Native America may just offer a way out, he says. More to come.
Darkness is only the absence of light. Like loneliness is the reason we fight. And fear is the reason we might never know what it'd be like if we all realized the meaning of our lives and lived as if life depended on the gifts we tried to hide. Whoever told you can't fly was afraid of heights you reach if you try. You better free your mind before they illegalize thought. There's a war going on. The first casualty was truth, and it's inside you.
That was Awakening by Climbing Poetry from their album Intrinsic. You can catch Climbing Poetry on the show in our archives. And if this show uplifts your spirits, take a moment to uplift ours by becoming a sustaining member. If everyone listening right now subscribed to this podcast and committed to donating just $2 a month, we'd be cooperatively funded by you and very uplifted, able to focus more time on reporting and less on digging for philanthropic sources that don't compromise our mission. What the philanthropic sector tends to fund often contradicts the source of their funds, explains my guest, Edgar Villanueva. He's the author of Decolonizing Money and is one of the very few Indigenous people working in the field. It's not just what foundations fund, the good works that they go out there and fund. It's what they themselves do. You make the point that only a very small proportion of a foundation's endowment is ever given away.
Absolutely.
And there's sometimes a very big problem with where most of that money sits still. What needs to change at that level?
I think there needs to be a lot more accountability. We are seeing now, I think, and hearing more conversations around what's happening with that 95%, right? So we know that, as you said, foundations are only required by Congress to pay out a minimum of 5% of their assets. That 95% is then invested in mostly with the intention of earning more money. And so they are the majority of foundational resources, which is about $800 billion in this country, are invested in industries that harm and extract from communities. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is the actual net value of philanthropy if we're investing crumbs sort of in progressive work, and then within 95% of our assets, there's no values around how that money is invested.
I mean, it really goes to an idea about the system. Like, we do actually believe in the system, says philanthropy, because that's how we're going to make our money, and then we're going to give you some crumbs along the way. Is there a way to flip that script while still, as it were, operating in the system?
Absolutely. I think there is definitely an incremental approach to changing that and making the system as it is work much better for us. We see foundations like the Heron Foundation, who was one of the first to put 100% of its resources, assets into mission-related investments that would reinforce the mission of the foundation. The Ford Foundation has taken some steps in committing $1 billion of its resources or assets into mission-related, which is just a start considering the size of their endowment. And then recently, the Nathan Cummins Foundation has made a decision publicly and shared that publicly to put 100% of their resources into mission-related. And so I think this type of maybe peer pressure effect hopefully will take hold. But we also have seen that there is evidence that you can actually invest in good causes and have a return on that, which I think is important to foundations.
Now, I should say here that until our wonderful viewers step up and take the place of philanthropy, which we hope they will, philanthropy still props up this program. And philanthropy meaning foundations like the Novo Foundation. Peter Buffett of the Novo Foundation writes the introduction to your book. You quote them. So I need to say that. And I'm proud to say it in the sense that I really feel that foundation does operate differently and is in a way a kind of a model. So that's my view on the matter. It seems like you agree. What other foundations do you lift up as doing things right or notably differently?
There's a number of philanthropic models out there that I am very inspired by. Some are really looking at how to democratize decision-making around who gets resources, bringing folks who are from the front lines and most impacted by issues that foundations are trying to solve, bringing those folks to the table to decide where that money should go, right? And so when you look at funds like the Groundswell Fund, which is this radical feminist fund, and how they engage, movement leaders actually around the table to raise that money, but also decide who should get that funding, I think is a beautiful example of philanthropy at its best. There are also indigenous models of philanthropy that exist to support, a movement building in Native communities, but we've also indigenized the process of how we decide where that funding goes.
Oh, so talk more about that. I mean, did Standing Rock, do you think, create a kind of shift in the appreciation that we as a society have of Native wisdom and strategy? Absolutely.
Standing Rock really brought Native leadership and Native worldview to a global platform. It was a beautiful moment, even internal to our communities, for so many tribes to come together in solidarity.
This was around the fights around the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Absolutely. So that moment where we had all of our communities and so many folks who came in solidarity, influencers, to really see firsthand, it was broadcast nationally, daily on the news, what was happening there. Until that moment, some folks didn't know that Native communities still existed in the U.S., right, which is really sad. But it also showed the power of resilience, coming together, spirituality, and has really created and opened the door for a lot of folks to ask, how can we help? And so we've been really busy, those of us who work in this space, to be a broker or a bridge between philanthropy and resources in Native communities, to really educate and to capitalize on this moment, so to speak, to keep that awareness happening and get resources to our communities.
Some big players, I think Wells Fargo among them, have said that they want to repair some of the damage. What do you make of those sorts of commitments, promises?
I think that individuals or organizations, when they get to a place of acknowledging harm that they've caused, I'm open to hearing. I'm open to sitting down and having a conversation. I think, in talking with folks who work with offenders and work to repair and rehabilitate offenders, I've learned that it's not about at all giving them a pass, right, for the harm they've caused, but really understanding their intentions and hearing from them gives us more insight into the motivation behind that type of behavior. So I might be a little Pollyanna, but I do believe in the human spirit and our ability to change. I have to keep hope alive. And although we're pushing back against a really ugly history of white supremacy and domination and all of that, I think, that there is a possibility that folks can change. Yeah. And so sitting down, having the conversation is just a start.
Without romanticizing Native American culture and experience, you do make the point that the Cherokee Nation doesn't have a word for poverty. Is that right? and that your mother, you feel, was your first real philanthropist. Just end on that note. Like,
Sure.
What's the alternative way in Native America to address matters of inequality?
So when I started writing this book, I talked to a lot of elders in my community, in my tribe, the Lumbee tribe, around the word philanthropy. No one knows what that word is. I think my mom, after 14 years, can probably say the word philanthropy, and that's the field that I work, right? But the idea that we have around that, the concept of the love of mankind and helping and supporting, the value is really connected to the word reciprocity. It's a quick way to sum it up. And that word embodies relationship, mutual caring. I give to you because you're going to give to me. And we just coexist in relationship with one another. And I think that simple worldview, if that could be applied to philanthropy, we could see transformative change. Philanthropy is very much transactional. Power dynamics from who has resources, who doesn't have the resources, the culture of competition that we perpetuate among nonprofits. It's very counterculture to our way in Native communities of existing and being. So I think the field has a lot to learn from us, the resilient, who are still here, are still thriving after hundreds of years of struggle. And so I'm interested in continuing to learn more from my own culture so that I can be a better human being and a better philanthropist.
Edgar Villanueva, his book, Decolonizing Wealth, comes out October 16th. It's available for pre-order now. Thanks. To watch my full interview with Edgar Villanueva, check out our website, lauraflanders.org. Next, we report from the United Nations, where Indigenous people gathered this spring to flip the script on so-called Indigenous issues. Just whose issues are they?
Being here at the United Nations in New York City and meeting with Indigenous peoples from around the world.
Andy Leah Marie Masset of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara tribal nations of North Dakota, and the Indigenous Environmental Network.
It's so powerful. They do it because they know that there is a line that we have to draw and say, this isn't just a game, this isn't just a meeting in a building. There's a reality to us wanting to protect our future. And so I think it's important to lift up the struggle of Indigenous women, not wanting to just be in the household or cooking or seen with these traditional roles. If people here know the struggles that exist in other areas and territories, there could be that compassion to somehow help, especially with the women and children in their struggle for land right and land title.
But I want to place these in, quote, positive changes in terms of how the bank has responded to FPIC and this emerging international law within a broader critique of what's known as the development apparatus.
We are right now here at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. It's the 17th session and is talking about lands and territories.
Lucy Walenka of Maasai, Kenya, and the Executive Director of the Indigenous Information Network.
Indigenous people are marginalized in almost all development. That's why we are effectively participating in the agendas 2030 and about the Sustainable Development Goals. And we are really pushing that no one is left behind, no matter how remote you are.
I'm so happy to be at this 70th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues.
Eshatu Manu of Mbora Pastoralist Community, Cameroon, and Indigenous Women's Advocate and Coordinator.
The theme of this year, which is Indigenous Collective Right to Land, Territories and Resources, is a very important issue for us as Indigenous people and pastoralists as well. I will plead that women land rights and girls in particular and Indigenous human rights defenders regarding land issues should be also taken into consideration.
I'm participating in the Forum for Indigenous Peoples to talk about the situation of women, young people in Indigenous communities. Otilia Lux de Coti of Quique Maya, Guatemala, and advisor to Madres Guatemala program. What we came to demand from the nation-states, the UN, and the financial institutions is the utmost respect for the human rights of Indigenous peoples, because we have individual and collective rights. We came to demand respect for the free, prior, and informed consent for any project taking place on Indigenous land.
We are here to recommend the UN to have a special mechanism for free, prior, informed consent, which is enshrined in United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Yaso Kante Batachan of Tekali, Nepal, and Vice Chair of the National Indigenous Women Forum.
A lot of land grabbing and militarization and violence against women is happening in my country.
Ledovina Gil Zamora of Mezquito, Nicaragua, and defender with Wanki Tang Ni. I've been talking about the rights of indigenous peoples and water contamination. Gold miners wash gold and then contaminate the water. As women, we need water, and it takes us very long, sometimes 2 or 3 hours to get water. So we're speaking about the rights of women as well. Kamala Thapa of Magar, Nepal, and program coordinator of the National Indigenous Women's Federation.
We're asking to UN agencies that please let us live in our own land. In the hilly side, there are lots of hydropower projects where indigenous people living in the hillsides are displacing by the hydropower projects, which is unfair. We want to ask UN agency to support us to pressurize our government to stop this kind of violence, which is we are facing nowadays.
Lucy Mulankai, Executive Director of the Indigenous Information Network.
Indigenous women from these poor countries, as we call ourselves, they're always resilient. No matter what burden it is, we carry with a positive thinking that something will be okay. And the little things that we do really matter, because those are the things that we do and we build up and make a difference for our community.
Thank you. Our time is up and we have to move on to the next side event. Thank you, everybody. Once again.
You've been listening to the Laura Flanders Show special report from the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. It included voices from the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung and Madres delegation of Indigenous women leaders from around the world. You can watch this entire episode at our website and check out all our archives at www.lauraflanders.org. Subscribe to this podcast while you're there, and you'll get my weekly commentary. The latest, Cooperatives from Brooklyn to Brattleboro. It's socialism as close as your closest co-op. Like what you're hearing? Be sure to write a review in Apple Podcasts. It helps us spread the word. And put your money where your media is by becoming a sustaining member of independent media or making a one-time donation. Go to lauraflanders.org. This show is produced by yours truly and Tammy Warnoff, Monica Mohapatra, Danica D'Souza, Charlotte Carpenter, Jeannie Hopper, Mira Al-Rahim, and Dominic Marcella. The program's made possible by the Novo Foundation, the Fonda Foundation, Cloud Mountain, and the Rising Fund, as well as by listeners like you. We can only do this together. Stay kind, stay curious. Until the next time, I'm Laura Flanders.